Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Oh. And happy Valentine's Day. I chose not to wear red today because this is, in fact, the 17th Budget Forum. So I thought that would not be a good choice. And then an hour ago, I realized green does not mean we're rolling in money. So pay no attention to the colors. If I haven't seen some of you this semester, given that I wasn't at a couple of significant opening events, I will belatedly say happy semester. I know we are all, as usual, running off to a fast start. And I know that this semester has not been without its challenges. Some of them sort of normal challenges, and this is not saying on. And some of them I know many of you went above and beyond because we had students trying to get classes, trying to add courses to their schedules. I know what pressures it puts on lots of people, and I thank you for being responsive where you could and understanding where there were constraints and realities where we need to help manage that. We sometimes forget here that, because we don't go really through the spring of other places in the nation, that spring is a time of change, but I certainly bet everybody in this room knows that it is a time of change here at Cal State San Marcos, and certainly in our system. All of us have had a lot of things on our mind about what that change will mean to us, now what it's meaning to us, how we'll come out of the other side of that change. Pressures certainly at the national level, on the higher education landscape, transitions in CSU leadership, on my mind obviously a lot, and significant changes on our campus, and I will talk a little bit about those in a little bit. What we all know, but we manage it so well here at Cal State San Marcos, but we know any kind of change, even if it actually is for good reasons or will lead to good or better outcomes, that it brings a whole set of emotions for all of us. Discomfort, anxiety, fear, uncertainty. You may have a new boss. I have a new boss. You may be in a new part of our organization. You may be in a new role in the same part of our organization. You may be learning some new ways of doing things. We may be using different technologies. So all of this is, I think, sometimes healthy for an organization. We've had some unpredicted and unpredictable and multiple sources of internal change that probably has shaken all of us up a little bit more than certainly I anticipated in early December. I hope we continue to manage it well, and I do hope that there are many positive outcomes during and at the end of some of these processes. And of course, we stay for how many years now? 6, with some continued uncertainty at the state level about budgets, despite the governor's statements, and obviously at the national level. So I'm going to talk about funding and budgets. I'm going to talk about, not surprising to any of you in the 17th Forum, that we still live with some of those uncertainties. They may get reduced over the course of the next 6 months, and we may be able to, at some point, look at a couple of year projections where there's a little more knowns than unknowns, but lots of uncertainty. So I'm not here, never have been, to promise you that there is certainty in what we know are all of the next steps. I am trying to bring you, and when you saw the announcement for this, I didn't do it earlier because I just came off of 2 days of president's meetings with the new chancellor in Long Beach about a lot of high-level conversations, and what is clearly wasn't predictable for me on Monday is how a new chancellor might change the conversation and therefore direction of the system. I don't know all of the answers today about that, but I'll talk to you a little bit about what I think out of that, and felt today I would have a little bit more knowns about that and timelines going forward. Um, at some point in certain conversations across the campus and with some of you, what I will say to end this piece and come back to it later about transitions, unless some of you in this audience know more than I do, there are no more planned transitions and departures at Cal State San Marcos, and I won't sign the documents. So if you're waiting for the next shoe to drop, I know of no other shoes dropping, and I hope no other shoes drop for us this semester, although the outcome of having really talented people, which we do, is they do get offers, and sometimes career trajectories cause them to need to leave us. But that said, no planned future transitions or departures. So let me talk, because this is a budget forum in part at least, about the state budget. Some of this I have said to you before, but I find it sometimes bears repeating. You know that with the passage of Prop 30, our Board of Trustees agreed to refund the 9.5% tuition increase that they had approved a year ago in November, meaning November 2011. So what I've said to you before is the $125 million gift from the governor to the CSU, $5.4 million of that in the routine way we apportion that allocation system-wide or have in the past, meant for $5.4 to us. But we returned $4.1 million in tuition. So I said this to you last fall, net gain right now, $1.3 million. And so I said to you before, we're not racing out to figure out and ask you how many ways we can spend $1.3 million. All right, so that's one piece of it. I also probably don't have to remind you that we are, even with that little bit of return, we here are $18 million less in state appropriated funds than we were in 2008. So $1 million doesn't really go a whole lot of ways if we really have a restoration mentality and a thought that somehow it's going to plug big pieces. I've also said to you that what you've read, I know, is that the governor in that $125 million allocation to the system said he wants $10 million off the top to go to technology and online. We don't even know what he means. We don't know how we would like to use it. But then it's not even $125 million, right? It's $115 million to the system. In actuality, the $125 million came to the system. The refund in tuition was $137 million. So take another $7 million off of that. So the total at the moment that we're looking at across the system is $108 million. Then the governor is promising, although the LAO did not agree with it, which is a good sign, whether it's a powerful sign, I don't know, but the governor said, and in the future, the CSU is going to pay for its own debt service, which we've not ever had to do, and in the future, the system is going to have to pay for any increase in retirement benefits, which we've not had to do. So take a little bit of that, whatever you think those projections are, and could be, in the red, or certainly not in a lot of capital. The LAO did not agree with the governor on the debt service and the retirement benefits. The system, as far as the conversations in the last 2 days, the system will continue to push the legislature to hope that they might separate themselves from the governor on that. But even if that doesn't happen, we always have had to pay for mandatory costs, health care benefits and utilities, out of our control, always increasing, and a substantial part of the revenue. So, doesn't sound really rosy. Better than being cut another $5 million? Yes. The fact that the governor has put forward a 4-year allocation package that continues to increase the CSU budget by 5% for two years and then 4% for the second 2 years, provided we do not increase as a system tuition. is a bit of a positive. It perhaps will get us back to having some measure of predictability in our budgets going forward. Back when you remember when we had compacts with Governor Schwarzenegger, we had more predictability. That could be a good thing. And we don't know how much more this governor will intend to micromanage how we manage the little bit of money that we've got. Still better than not? Yes. So that's a piece if you follow some of that. So not a whole lot of money. I would also say to you, to remind you, that when our Board of Trustees in, I think their November board meeting, maybe even earlier, when they looked at the budget that they were going to present to the legislature going forward, it was 3 times more than what we're getting. So the system, I would say to you, the system and the presidents understood the needs. The system and the president said, let us, and the Board of Trustees, we really need to talk about line items for compensation increases. We need to really get money back in terms of capital dollars for deferred maintenance on campuses. We need all of that, but that didn't happen. So, and when I said healthcare costs, you know, the mandatory costs that have not been part of our budget for forever are the ones that are also not only not controlled by us, but often unpredictable in terms of how much a health care benefit increase, often 18% a year, is on our budget. There have been early, our chancellor just officially started on January 2nd, there have been early signs, conversations over the last 2 days with the presidents and the chancellor about being more strategic, about enrollment, being more strategic, about budget allocation. There have been conversations about, in that strategic, actually having campuses have performance measures, many of their own choosing, connected to high-level system priorities, and that there might actually then be accountability to campuses when they do not meet them. Now that would be, in my 9 years, a significant and positive change for us, not for all, but for us who set our goals and actually achieve those goals. So, some optimism there. And the fact that I have already, since 2009, and just the last one in mid-December, sent 4 memos to the Chancellor's office about where we have lots of strategic advantage if there was funding. Strategic advantage by our geography, by our demography, by our proximity to Camp Pendleton, in a number of ways that really should, and I know I'm speaking to most of the choir here, but that really should, in many ways that no other campus can do, position us for the system to say, that's where some investment of some additional funds really would pay off, in consultation with what we think are doable goals and how we could achieve them. At the meetings of the last day and a half with the new chancellor, and I said to you some of the early signs, I may have said to some of you the early signs, I have to say to you that it was a conversation. It was a very clear, continued commitment of a chancellor who just came from being a campus president, who understands where a lot of this decision-making and responsibility lies, and that it should be on a campus, not the third tier of a chancellor's office directing us what to do. Music to my ears to get to that place. This chancellor is an active listener. this chancellor has, yes, some opinions, but really invites respectful differences of opinion. And 23 presidents, mostly respectfully, have differences of opinion on a lot of issues. So the conversations were finally, in my estimation, of a substantive nature that were at the level where presidents ought to be involved and invested early on, consultative. In 1.5 days, we didn't obviously make a lot of decisions because our chancellors knew to try to hear and listen and move, but a very different level of, and we were very clear on the phone and yesterday, very clear, and I think he really gets it, that we need different rules of engagement between our system and our campuses. And they need to get out of our business and actually be facilitators and enablers. Wouldn't that be a pleasant change? And as a campus, we also have to then agree, if they start changing, we have to make sure that we know that we're not jumping when they do it and that we are following our internal processes of reporting, consulting, up through our mechanisms and or asking questions when we need. So a lot of positive possibilities going forward, obviously within the global budget context of the very little amount of money, what are high order needs across the campuses. There was, and I will say this because there's certainly faculty in the room, and this has been on their minds since 2008 probably. There was a conversation about faculty equity phase 2 or whatever that is called. Very, very robust, thoughtful conversation. There was a conversation about what can we do with so little money about compensation for employees throughout our system who have had, a lot of them, no raises. I say a lot of them, obviously if people have moved to a job internally or done, there hasn't been none, but there hasn't been none. So thoughtful about that. We were consulted. I was on a call just this morning about what we thought our campus's enrollment targets should be, could be, and why. Thankfully, because we are so smart, we had this paper ready in December. So when asked yesterday, I sent it up at 11 o'clock last night and said, here's what we want, and here's why we want it, and then talked to a vice chancellor. I think they know we're in a place, wherever our student affairs people and enrollment management people, clearly know campuses now need to know for next year budget targets, and they need to know soon. So they are going to make decisions very soon, and we will see how strategic they can make them, and if they can make them differently than we have seen them made for a number of years. I'm optimistic. I'm an optimist by nature, but I am optimistic on this one. And then we will roll those conversations forward into the, later in the spring, because the hope is that we really can create ways where each campus has, some known enrollment targets multiple years out, some notions about budget increases multiple years out. How the heck you can, how we have been so successful in all of the uncertainty and with no help from the system more than 3 months before we have to do whatever it is they want us to do in terms of shutting enrollment down, add people in the spring, et cetera. So I'm hopeful that these thoughtful conversations will move us forward, and we will have a strategic advantage as a campus, and that we will have a bit more longer-term predictable models to be able to be even more thoughtful as a campus going forward. So I want to leave the budget for a minute and go into transitions, and obviously when I'm finished, you can go, as you always do, anywhere you want. Our new chancellor has also had a face-to-face meeting with the statewide senate, the system-wide student association, spoken briefly to the vice presidents of finance and the vice president of student affairs, held 4 conference calls with the presidents before or by mid-January, trying to both feel the climate, understand from a variety of places and perspectives the issues, and try to figure out what are high-level time-sensitive, immediate decisions that must be made, and then how we can move forward with a little bit more consultative, thoughtful processes on others. He's beginning the campus visit planning. You know, we have not yet been put on the list. I'm hopeful it happens this spring, but not. I did what I could in terms of pushing that. You've heard me say before, themes throughout the discussions with Tim White have been one size does not fit all, that it's about relationship building or relationship rebuilding. He has a very, I think, finely honed sense that almost across internal and external constituencies, we have to reset the tone of relationships. System to campuses, system to legislators, Chancellor's office to unions. He gets that. I think that will be a part of his leadership, and I think it'll be part of presidential conversation, and hopefully, frame that obviously we all have roles in that. He used in the last day and a half, he used language, and this is not written in stone, and it's not a revisioning of the system, but he kept saying we are collectively about people, programs, and places. And if we can have high-level system goals, we ought to be able to differentiate strategically how each of those campuses can meet some of them, so as a collective we meet a lot of them. Not rocket science, but we haven't had those discussions in my 9 years before. So instead of having to meet, 35, he is committed, oh, hallelujah, to reducing the 1,000 executive orders and to get a handle on how in the world this creep happened anyway, so that we don't have an executive order every time one person on one campus stepped out of line and then we get another executive order. More than 1,000. I mean, they've counted them up. All right, a little bit about the transition. So I think the early signs are good. He has a sense of humor. He's personable. And I will also tell you that there are small signs that I pick up on. We went to the State University House, the Chancellor's residence, for dinner Tuesday night. They are not even out of their boxes in this house. On the walls of all the public spaces are hanging faculty art from a couple of campuses. They did it quick. They want to rotate it in a process. They want to showcase the talents of CSU employees. And that may be little, but I think it's incredibly symbolic and important. And I think many of us were touched by that sensitivity and that decision. All right, so let's move to here and a little bit of, so that's going on up there, and then we're doing some of this change here. Obviously, lots of transitions on this campus. Some of them I certainly knew were possible. As I've said to many of you, with mixed feelings, sort of, you don't want to hope that a wonderful provost doesn't become a president, and then you do. But we really have moved, I think, in quick order. I mean, we had the resignation from Derek Crawford, and that was entirely family, father, illness-related, proximity, etc. A real blow to me, I think to many of us, because he had done such wonderful work. I knew Emily was in a search. I knew she should be a president. And I know that when you have those aspirations, you generally need to move geographically to do them. And I knew that Eloise was in a search with different sets of interests and expectations of a different level of engaging in student life, etc. And they all lined up for all of those people. And so we had, Emily's announcement, and a week later, Eloise's announcement. What I have tried to do, which has been hard with a multitude of moving parts, is when Emily announced, I think a day or 2 days later, the academic leadership group was already scheduled to meet, and I joined them. Talked about what the processes could be, said to them, talk to me about what you think we should do. And then I invited them to have one-on-ones, and almost everybody in AALC, which is a substantial group, took me up on the one-on-ones. And the delight was, and the good outcome was, there was a whole lot of consensus and congruence in their high-order recommendations. One, that I, with their consultation, appoint an interim provost, and we launch a national search. Two, when asked the who's, while there were multiple people, there was a lot of support for Graham Oberum to move into that interim vice president position. And then there were the secondary questions about, we have two deans, library and education, health, and human services that were just put into sort of 6-month or short-term appointments. What do you think? And they uniformly said, we really don't want to be searching for those deans. We would like a provost to come and get settled and have the ability to search and appoint new deans. So you need to beg, arm twist, whatever it takes to get those two people to extend their appointments through the spring of 2014. I think all of that was done in a fairly time-sensitive, consultative process. That said, it still shakes a whole lot of people up. You saw the announcement, it went out maybe last week. The search committee took just a little bit longer to put together because you all know that these search committees mean that the Academic Senate, ASI, AALC all have to provide me with recommendations, and this all happened right at the end of the semester. So it took a little longer for us to get the search committee, but just to remind you, and I also said to AALC, so I always would want, and I think it's appropriate to have a vice president chair a vice president's committee, and I will say to you that there was entire commitment to having Linda Hawk chair that search committee. Obviously, many of you know that our Vice President of Finance and our Provost, work side by side with the University Budget Committee. And so Linda agreed to chair that search. Ronald Arnold from the College of Humanities, Arts, Behavioral, and Social Sciences is on the committee. Kyle Ascuna, who's our student representative. Pam Bell, Project and Degree Audit Coordinator, IITS. Vasilis Doulakis, College of Business Administration. Mike Schroeder, Dean of Extended Learning. Adam Shapiro, Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, Behavioral, and Social Sciences. Lori Stoll, College of Education, Health, and Human Services. Putting these high-level search committees is difficult. Everybody would like representation, but you don't want a committee of 40 who then can't move forward. So I know not every college, not every division, not every department, not every classification is represented on the committee, but our search processes hopefully are inclusive for people to meet candidates, have feedback, et cetera. Our timeline on the provost search is with an expectation that we will have finalists on campus end of April, early May, so that obviously the full campus can participate, provide input, and I would hope to then be able to negotiate and appoint a permanent president who would be with us July 1 for our next fiscal year. I think I jumped over that. So that was the big piece. Then the other pieces are, Graham wonderfully says yes and moves up, but then Graham's not in that other job that Graham was, right? Janet Powell says yes to be 18-month dean, but now Janet Powell's not in the job she was. So there's been also many people across this campus have just stepped up, stretched, reached out to either hold positions or fill tasks to allow us to do that. So in a very thoughtful early conversation with Graham, there was his assessment of some of the tasks that had been in his portfolio as AVP that could be tasked out to very competent leaders on our campus so that he didn't do those as well. So backfilling some of his tasks, Sharon Hamill is going to be our WASC ALO, in addition to all the other things that Sharon does and does well. Dawn Formo is going to take on Graham's former role as co-chair of the Long Range Academic Master Plan, LAMP. Michelle Hunt will serve as interim assistant vice president for faculty affairs, taking on a piece of what Janet Powell used to do. So, these are the cascading has probably kept everybody watching the communications and maybe worrying who's next, in student affairs, a week after Emily announced round 2, I did exactly the same process. I met with the student affairs leadership team as a collective. I invited them to meet or talk with me one-on-one. Again, almost everybody took that option. And collectively and individually, and differently than academic affairs, which is as it should because each division has a sense of who they are and what their needs are. In student affairs, the strong recommendation was not to search this spring, to appoint an interim vice president for a year. 1, they have some tasks to finish. 2, having 2 high-level vice presidential searches stretches all of us, and then begin that student affairs national search early in the fall. Also, similarly to Graham, while there was certainly talent, lots of talent in student affairs, a lot of consensus that Lorena Mesa was the person to step up. You all remember that Lorena was hoping that she was just vacating doing 2 AVP jobs when I made the call and said, will you step up? So a lot of consensus there. She agreed to step up, and then obviously we had the backfill of then what happens in student affairs. What you have likely read by now, Bridget Blanchard agreed to serve in the dual role of AVP for student academic support and student life and leadership. Bridget, will become now the chair of the Academic Excellence and Student Success Fee Task Force, another one that had been in Graham's portfolio. So Bridget will lead that, and then to assure that we have academic representation, Rick Fierro from the College of Science and Math will step in to have a role on that Academic Excellence and Student Success Task Force. I can't say this too many times, so. Then, of course, with Bridget moving in to do 2 roles, Dilsey Perez stepped up as interim dean of students, and Greg Toya will have interim oversight of the student life and leadership team. In both of these divisions, just to me, extraordinary examples of people thinking division first, people being thoughtful, people being willing to stretch out of their own comfort zone. And while it may feel different to some of you on your end versus on my end, I just think a lot of campuses couldn't have done this with this amount of quickness necessary to filling the positions and goodwill and trust in all of the processes. I started out with Derek, and then I lost that piece, but I also did consulting when Derek said that he was leaving with a number of the members of Derek's transition team to say who can seamlessly step into that role on the diversity ed equity piece and keep us moving while we search. Uniformly, Scott Gross. And Scott agreed to stretch a little bit more to do that. And not in Lorena's case or in Graham's case, they may choose and are welcome to be candidates. In Scott's case, it was a very deliberate conversation of Scott was not interested in the AVP for diversity, and that is why Scott is chairing that search committee. That search committee for diversity includes Roger Day Andreas, Lisa McLean, our student Arthur Silverstein, Melanie Chu, Gary Rowlandson, Marilyn McWilliams, and Scott as chair. So, just a little bit of going forward, because you probably have now a whole lot more questions. So, I always try to say, what does our immediate future here look like with any sense of optimism and predictability? You heard me just reference the Academic Excellence and Student Success Fee. You may have seen, just went out today, right, Kathy? The communication. We talked about this in the fall of using an alternative consultation process to see this spring whether there was student support and understanding of why we would have an academic excellence and student success fee. I consulted, we talked in the fall about, the negatives of this. We understand that system tuition has increased for students. I certainly understand on this campus, in my lifetime, we have increased athletic fees with referendums twice and had alternative consultation where students agreed to tax themselves for the student union. But as I look forward, even in all my optimism, there's not going to be a whole lot of state money coming our way. One, even with what I've said to you about our new chancellor and his consultative nature and the fact that he's been a campus president and gets it, the fees that we control locally, we truly control locally. And we're not then being micromanaged by a system of how to direct them. So, despite one doesn't want to overburden students, despite what we've done here in the last 5 or so years to ask students to tax themselves, I think for good purpose, and obviously for things that the state would never pay for, i.e. athletics and a student union. In this case, the collective decision was there are ways, there's money we need, goodness knows. And there are things that we clearly need to do in the future best interest of this campus, and I don't see it coming from increased state appropriation. We were just talking about student crashers. We were talking about how you try to facilitate time to graduation when you don't have the money to mount course sections that students need in the timely fashion that takes them to graduation. That money's not going to come from the state. It isn't. I mean, if you just followed my, back of the envelope math, it's not happening. So we will go through, I think we went through a wonderful process for the student union. We will go through a similar process of face-to-face forums, of a very robust web site for students to learn about why and what this means, what we think is a staged-in process of fees, and a high level, what would the fees go for? And obviously, academic excellence and student success is really what we're looking at. So, that will be this semester. It has to be this semester. Charlie Reed had to approve us. I had to go and talk with him. He approved it. A little glitch. We have a new chancellor. But I think if our students give us the feedback that they understand what the value would be to them, then I really don't see the chancellor not approving or initiating that fee. So that's this spring. We need to do it this spring. The consultative process needs to end around where's Dawn? Well, she's right. Why don't I pick out on Dawn, who doesn't even know, right? Maybe, sorry, Dawn. Maybe the end of March, early April, so that we can bring it to the chancellor and be able to notice students in advance of fall. So that's one. Obviously, as I know more, you will know more about budget enrollments for 13-14, about any conversations about what will go to the Board of Trustees at their March meeting will be at a high level from the conversation with the presidents, the chancellor's thoughts about this little bit of money and how it ought to be allocated against the highest of needs across the system. Obviously, some of you are more involved in this discussion or not. What will face us for the next couple of months is more robust conversations about space. We vacated parts of buildings when we went into SBSB a year and a half ago. What I said to some of you, but maybe all of you don't know, when we moved into social and behavioral sciences, it was the first time, maybe in the history of the system, certainly in decades, where the state didn't give us renovation money for the space that was vacated. There's none of that anywhere. So we have vacant space. Some of it has been allocated. Some of it is still vacant. We have that huge student union. And I will say to you, the huge student union will not vacate as much space as we all might think when we see that glorious, because it's ballroom space and it's meeting space and it's and it's some of that, and it was paid for by students. And in the consultative process and the deliberation, obviously, student organizations, ASI, clubs, etc., get first dibs on that space, and student life and leadership. But there will be space vacated on the campus when we move into student union, somewhere maybe over next Christmas holidays or early spring. We know we will break ground sometime maybe in the summer for student health, and we know we're moving School of Nursing back onto campus. So there's a lot of both empty spaces, spaces always, there's never enough space and it's never rightly configured, and everybody wants more of it than almost any campus ever has. Have we done it all right in the last 6 months? No. Are we going to now try to recalibrate and backtrack where we need to and go forward? We're going to create a Space Central website. I'm not sure we're calling it that, but like Budget Central, where people actually can go and see vacated spaces, have the principles, the policies we do exist under, some of them system policies, some of them our own, and create or recreate some processes of how we get consultation, input, and still can make timely decisions so we can actually start renovations or move people into the student union. So we went back and unfroze some of the processes, or realized in some cases maybe the processes didn't happen that we thought happened, whatever it was. But space will be on a lot of conversations, divisions. Each division will be looking and re-examining what they sent up a year or so ago, or creating new ways to have that consultative process about space. And we obviously will be filling a number of positions, but certainly 2 significant high-level ones. And we went through the first search for a diversity officer with high expectations, high campus involvement, and I think we really did a collective good job in hiring Derek. I am no less committed to that, that high, getting an incredibly good candidate who can move now with a diversity strategic plan, finished, fully vetted and approved. A provost search is a huge search. There was a little conversation among the presidents. There's a number of high-level positions in the system vacant. Some provost, some finance, a few advancement, et cetera. And the question, of course, is with pension reform in particular and flat salaries, how competitive will we be and what will we see our pools? Obviously, I don't know for the provost search. A few of the campuses said so far they haven't seen it as a big problem, that the CSU has still got a good quality, that nationally there's not a lot of salary increases and a lot of publics going on anywhere. I continue to think we really do have an advantage, that we still are the best CSU and we can attract the best talent. But it's going to take all of us. I mean, it's going to take all of us reaching out to good candidates. It's going to take all of us, when we see the finalists, sort of being there, being involved for both of these searches. These are incredibly important leadership positions at this campus. And what did I say at the report? No one gets a pass. We need your involvement in whatever places you can, because I think we need to continue to have just the finest in the CSU that we have. So that will be another piece of this spring's tasks for us all that we know about. And then we all will continue to live with what the changes mean. I think there's going to be a lot of system change. I think a lot of it will be positive, but it's going to be change. And as rules of engagement change, or people in the system office change, or whatever. So we're not done with change here, and they're not done, I hope, with change there. So I think that will be another that'll keep us a little bit more probably feeling anxious and uncertain. And what I will end with, which I know you all know, is there is no budget until the legislature passes the budget. And no matter what the Board of Trustees may say as principles in March, until we have the dollars, we really don't have the dollars. We're going to engage in process of what if we get the dollars. We're going to engage in, obviously, enrollment targets on the presumption of getting the dollars. The one note that was cast yesterday, no, everybody thinks the governor's budget will pass. Some people are hopeful that the debt service and the pension, the retirement contributions will be pulled out. But you know, nationally, if our Congress doesn't do something, that could impact everything I'm talking about in terms of the economy of California. And that's an unknown none of us control. But I'm so angry about those folks in D.C. So that's the other piece that, you know, right now, in what they're not doing, or the foolishness that they are doing, could impact. I mean, if they actually, sequestration happens, you know, if they really decide to keep partisan politics and don't act, the economies of states could suffer, and if our economy in California rolls back, even this semi-small positive budget increase could disappear. I don't like to stop on a bad note, but I thought I probably needed to say that. So let me stop there and say questions about the budget system here, transitions, something I didn't talk about that you'd like me to talk about, if I know about. Really? All right, well then I will, oh, yes.
Justin Lewis, I think you mentioned that in the past, when we're talking about space issues and changes and migrations and moving around, there was money from other places for renovation of the sort of the backfill places that were available. As a resource and operations manager for student affairs and other people like me in other divisions, is that something that we should be considering having money available for when we're looking at space in terms of renovating our own space or changing it or making it available or things of that nature?
I'm carefully thinking through this because I was going to answer and realize it may be the wrong answer. One, I'm trying to stay out of getting into bargaining unit work issues. Two, what I would say to you, I think in honesty, you know, renovation meaning I'm now in this office and I want that wall painted purple. I don't know who would ever say that, but if somebody did, then maybe the president should say, you find the money to paint that wall purple. But in the large, you know, in the large picture, space is a university resource, which is why we're trying to have a process that hears voices, but centrally allocated, because space is university. So I don't think we're at a place where we're going to say, you can't do it because you can't afford it. What we're going to do is hear what you need and try then, looking big and broad, looking forward, say what makes sense. Can we see enough in the future that we're not renovating space, that in 2 years we're going to re-renovate the space back to where it was in the short term? We may look at, you know, whether there are other ways, I'm having trouble, other ways where there's short-term creation of space. But no, we're not going to sort of say to you, you can't talk about renovation or space if you can't afford it. But what we are saying is and you've heard me say this, and it's not new it's not this campus. You know, there is space that departments and divisions occupy and sort of own. And there are processes for, you know, faculty's positions change, and it may be then within a college. But overall, I have to say to you, space is a university piece, and we really have to look at best interest of what's students serving, do we have enough classrooms, et cetera. And the fact that the state didn't provide any renovation money for that very large social and behavioral science building that obviously vacated a lot of space has created, quite frankly, the inability to have a big plan. So we've, you know, cobbled, sixth floor Craven has little cobbled neighborhoods because there wasn't money. You know, so knock down a wall, but we didn't empty the floor and reconfigure it. Yeah, Bill.
Somebody who teaches a large lecture class, and it's really difficult to find the space. It's getting more and more difficult. Are these spaces available, like a space like this? I'm sitting here thinking, it wouldn't be so bad in teaching. Are the student, I don't know, the student-owned spaces, but like this, the field house and also the student union, are they going to be available to teach in, or how does that work? And are there, I assume it's going to cost money.
Well, okay, I'm looking over here to get some. I mean, part of it is, I say that you don't own space, but when space like the Clark Fieldhouse, for example, is in fact space that was built through student fee generation for a dedicated purpose, then it isn't state paid for space, so then you have to pay for it. So yes, it's available, but we have to say priorities are student usage. Yes, there's got to be some charge to space that is not state space. I don't know if Linda or Graham want to say any more. So could it be? Yes, but there are constraints. So some of our, but it's a good question, Bill, because there are some of our space that has those constraints, and that we can't just come into this facility and say, we're going to take this over as a classroom. Not without providing alternative space and money back into that pool. So at the same time, we're trying to deal with shorter-term space needs, meaning right now and next year. We are trying to figure out, and goodness knows having some enrollment projections longer term would help. What do we see the longer, we don't have large classrooms. We are really constrained on this campus for large classrooms. We are re-inventorying, how many classrooms have been added or taken offline with all of the moves around here. Whether there's other strategies that can provide some of that space. We are going to hopefully do a robust, a thorough, a consultative process that isn't going to take 3 years, and still try to get to these places so that we can find space, rent space, and see how we can move forward. Bella, you're nodding too? Okay. Anything else? Okay, somebody asked me, do you think this is the last budget forum at 17? I have no idea. What I will say to you is what I've said to you before. I will try to keep you informed on issues as I know them. I will try to be transparent in how we're processing forward. If I need to call one in 2 months, I will. If there's no really new news, I won't. And you all know you have forums, and I welcome questions, because sometimes I don't know what is in your minds and what is I know what makes me lose sleep, but I'm not always sure I know what makes all of you lose sleep. So I think the path ahead is better, both budget and system office. I think we do have all kinds of strategic advantages, and I expect to be an even stronger advocate for this campus that we get them. So thank you for all you continue to do. Thank you.